anyone who professes any kind of pro-Ukrainian sentiment in Russian-occupied areas is in danger.
Well, today voting is continuing in 4 occupied regions of Ukraine in referendums on joining Russia, which the West has called illegitimate and a sham. Joining us now is the Sunday Times' Middle East correspondent Louise Callaghan, who can tell us more. Morning, Louise. Morning, Louise.
Hi, good morning.
Hello. Your piece centres on people living in Russian-occupied areas of Ukraine who are also really concerned about being conscripted too. It's not just men in Russia who are in danger of being called up here.
That's right, exactly. And then so this weekend, as you mentioned, there's these sham referenda going on, which is not a vote in any way that we would normally recognise it, but it's basically just a kind of fait accompli by Russia. They're rolling it out and they're saying these 4 regions in Ukraine are now Russian. And that obviously would allow them a cover to start conscripting men from that area. And then so that's something that people in these regions have figured out, and that's something that the authorities there are already imposing. So on Thursday, just hours after this mobilization drive was announced, we went to the first Ukrainian checkpoint after Russian lines in Zaporizhia province, and it was full of men who were trying to escape. They were trying to escape the draft, and they said, "We're really worried. We're going to be, pressed into this army." But the really interesting thing was, obviously, the men who were trying to escape, they were largely kind of pro-Ukrainian, and they wouldn't have wanted to be part of Moscow's army. But there were people that we spoke to who were still inside Russian-held territories. Men who were, pro-Russian or sort of neutral, or didn't really care who was in charge. And they're the people that Moscow are kind of banking on to legitimize their rule there. But they were saying, absolutely not. We're not going to fight for Russia. I mean, however pro-Russian you are, you don't want to die for them. I think that's something that's really coming through. So that reality is really, really coming through now. Even to those people who were, on the fence or said, "Oh, I'm not political," or "I don't really care." It's the reality is really hitting them now.
Yeah, and that's stark as well. You mentioned accounts here from one occupied village where men have said that if Russians try to give them a gun, try to conscript them, they will use the gun to kill the occupiers. There's some very straight talking on this and lots of consternation. What else is happening in those occupied areas? How are residents dealing with this forced vote? We've seen unverified footage on social media of Russian armed forces, waving guns, effectively forcing people to vote and forcing how they vote as well.
Yeah, so this vote, it's about theatre and it's about creating an image of that a vote is really taking place. I think largely for Russian domestic audiences, because if you have other news sources than Russian state TV, it's pretty clear that there's not an actual huge vote taking place and that people in Zaporizhia and Kherson are desperate to join Russia. That's pretty obvious. But I think that this big exercise, this theatre, all this video that the Russian authorities are pumping out, showing people voting and showing people happy to be joining Russia, that's intended for their domestic audience so that they think, fantastic, these people are so happy to be liberated. We've got rid of the awful Ukrainians. Now they're finally going to join. Now they're finally going to join our country. So I think, we've been speaking to people inside the occupied areas who are saying, "Oh, I'm just going to." A really common refrain is, "Oh, I'm just going to keep my door locked." So people are going to stay at home and pretend there's no one there in case the soldiers come knocking. Oh, we haven't spoken to a single person who's going to vote in the referendum, and we've been calling people inside occupied territories and talking to huge numbers of people coming out the occupied territories all week. We haven't met a single person who said that's going to vote.
So there's going to be a seemingly low turnout there compared to the amount of people who are meant to be in these Russian occupied areas. But I suppose one advantage there is that the Russian government doesn't know what the population is like in those areas, so they don't know what to expect, and any ballot turned in will be pro-Russian.
Yeah, I think it's not. I think that the important thing to remember is that it's not an actual vote. This is just political theatre.
Sham
it's not
referendum is what it's being called.
It's a sham referendum. It's not as if all the people in Russian-occupied Zaporizhia got up and decided to cast their no vote, that Russia would be like, "Oh, right, hands off, then we'll head back to Moscow." It's really these numbers have been cooked up somewhere. They're probably in a file somewhere in Moscow, and they're going to just be brought out, and they'll say, 99% in Donetsk, 83% in Zaporizhia, as a little nod to the fact that people there might not be entirely thrilled with the presence of the Russians. But, it's not any kind of like normal democratic exercise.
Do you know what happens to someone who votes not to join Russia? Are they going to be penalised at all, or are they going to be allowed to sort of cast that vote, that ballot?
Well, I haven't actually met anyone who says they're going to vote, but given that all the pictures that we've seen coming out on social media have shown that these voting booths, if they are in public places, they're quite often with people sort of looking over their shoulders, and there have been some accounts that I've seen on local Telegram channels warning that Russian soldiers are, sitting there looking over their shoulder. But I mean, presumably these votes aren't even being counted. I don't think it's anyone who professes any kind of pro-Ukrainian sentiment in Russian-occupied areas is in danger.
Where are you heading next, Louise? What's on your schedule now?
Well, I finished the end of my rotation actually, so I'm in Odessa at the moment, and I'm going to be heading out this afternoon through Moldova.
Wow. Okay. Well, safe travels, and as ever, really interesting reading, really interesting reporting from you in Ukraine. Louise Callaghan is the Sunday Times' Middle East correspondent. Good to speak to you. Louise's piece is up online at thetimes.co.uk and in today's paper.